So some of the big talk around the Nintendo Switch is how the sales are going and what Nintendo's going to do for next generation, as we are in the 6th year of how Nintendo counts the years of the Nintendo Switch and what they're going to do next. Now, I have an idea in terms of stuff, but I wanted to talk about what actually proves with the Nintendo Switch 2022 lineup, the sales, like what it proves or what it says about the Nintendo Switch lifespan. But before we get into all of that, what's good everyone? OJ here. Welcome back to another video. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my videos first. Now let's go ahead and first start off with Nintendo and how they classify things so we're all on the same page, because this is very important. Now, if you count it up from actual year to year, Nintendo Switch is a little bit more than 5 years old. So it came out in March of 2017. We are now, as of the time that I'm recording this video, August. So we're looking at about or so 5 years and a half. Now, Nintendo does count it a little bit different. They count it from calendar years. So 2017 is 1 year, 2018 is another year, all the way up to 2022 at this point. So that is a 6-year lifespan, going on the 7th year for next year. So clearly Nintendo counts it as, hey, look, we want to have a certain type of lifespan. We are getting in the later half, but for the past couple of years or so, they've been saying we're halfway through, we're halfway through, we're halfway through. And it's like, how can you be halfway through like for like the last 3 years or so? That's what Furukawa's been saying, obviously being extremely coy and just putting out a vague halfway to not really show or tip their hand. Now, when it comes to 2022, Nintendo has had one of their best years on the Nintendo Switch, to be honest here. There's a lot of software coming out. We've had big games that have reviewed really well. Stuff like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 recently came out. We had a Kirby and the Forgotten Land that's selling extremely well. We had Nintendo Switch Sports that's selling extremely well. We also had Triangle Strategy that did really well for that style of game. We've had some big games come out. Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, Mario Strikers. There's been just a lot of stuff throughout the year, and even starting off the year with the big game Pokemon Legends Arceus that sold 12 million copies in about a month or two or so. So Nintendo is definitely not lacking for big releases or game sales. They've been doing fantastic. Now, year sales are down just because Nintendo has stated like, hey, we can't really supply enough systems because of the chip shortage. What we're seeing is that a lot of the Nintendo Switch OLEDs out there, a lot of the V2 Switches, those get bought up, and pretty much what you're seeing a lot left on store shelves, or what they sell the least of, is the Nintendo Switch Lite, which makes sense. Why would you want a Nintendo Switch that doesn't always switch? So those are kind of more of like a road trip type of thing, or you maybe give to the kid type of thing, or if you just want something to play while lying down in bed that's really light. So I understand that, but most people want the actual switching experience because that is the meat and potatoes and the main gimmick of the system. So that's the reason why the Nintendo Switch OLED is doing so well, because you get the best of both. You get a fantastic portable device that looks great, but then you also get all the bells and whistles of hooking it up and being like a home console. Now also even with an Ethernet port in there, so you don't have to buy the little extra dongle as well. So I can see why it's doing really, really well on the market right now at this point. But Nintendo is going through a chip shortage, just like Microsoft and Sony and various other tech manufacturers out there. However, there's been multiple reports that things are going to be ramping up. I'm starting to see more times where systems become available and people are able to get tickets or get in line, or PlayStation Direct, and more people have been able to buy Xbox Series S's and Xbox Series X. I've still never seen one in the stores when it comes to a PS5 or a Series X at this point, but I have seen a Series S one time, and there's a couple times or so I see a Nintendo Switch OLED, but I haven't really seen many of those. So the chip shortage is real, but hopefully things are going to be getting better. But how does this all factor into what Nintendo's going to do, and how does it relate to what Nintendo's going on right now in 2022? So Nintendo, like I said, has had a ton of great games this year, and it proves that people that are buying the Nintendo Switch, that are playing the Nintendo Switch, they're not as worried as other people on the internet, and the hardcore fans will make you believe about the performance of the system or about frame rates or resolutions. We hear a lot about it all the time, and don't get me wrong, it's legitimate and valid concern or whatever the case is. However, we can't force anybody to do something that's just not ready to come out, you know? And I think that's the one thing that gamers don't understand. They feel that if we say something, all of a sudden there'll be like a Switch Pro here tomorrow, and that's just not how it works. There's plans, it's logistics, so it's something that needs to be planned X, Y, or Z before time and then have a launch or lead up to it. So one thing that I have noticed though is that when it comes to the buying habits and patterns and what people are playing, I mean, people are buying just as much games out there. People are enjoying the Nintendo Switch quite a bit. So it kind of proves with 2022, it kind of shows that Nintendo really doesn't need anything right away, because the sales and the games that are coming out, people are buying and enjoying them. Now, like I said, it would be great if there was an option or something like that for people to get a little bit better performance or whatever the case is, but I do feel that that would have already been a thing if it wasn't for the chip shortage. Nintendo is having problems just supplying the regular Nintendo Switch OLED at this point, and now all of a sudden you introduce a new system that would just come out. I mean, we'd probably never be able to get it. And I would say that I feel that if Nintendo was going to do some type of pro solution soon, I think it would have been the Nintendo Switch OLED, right? That was the perfect opportunity to get some extra power in the system if you were going to do it. That was the perfect opportunity to get things going right there. But it seems like something, whatever it was, probably stopped them from doing that. So they doubled down on the software and doubled down on making sure that they get plenty of games and the fans have stuff to play. Now, I've heard all sorts of talk about how 2022 is not a great year for gaming, but I think when you're looking at it, it's like, okay, well, maybe not for Microsoft and Sony in all respects. No hate when it comes to that. I think that the games that have come out this year are great, like Elden Ring and Horizon and Gran Turismo. There's been a great number of games that came out, but obviously, if you're looking at just from the numbers and the facts, Nintendo Switch has had an incredible year with multiple good reviewed and high selling games. Stuff like Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak has also been another game that's kind of flew under the radar when people talk about it because it's an expansion, but it's doing extremely well with millions of those expansions being sold, and of course Nintendo Switch is being snapped up with those. We just recently had Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which there's been a lot of debate around that game, but people are just buying it and enjoying it, and it started out better than any other Xenoblade game in the history of Monolith Soft, any other Xeno game in the history of Monolith Soft. So this is definitely good news to kind of go off of as Nintendo probably gears up and gets ready for what they're going to be doing next. Now, what are the chances that Nintendo does have a Nintendo Switch Pro system sometime soon? Now, they could surprise us. We could get some type of announcement later this year or early next year, or maybe next year at some point for a Pro announcement. But I think the biggest thing with this and the discussion that my good friend RGT recently had on his channel, and what I've talked about with a next-gen Switch compared to a Nintendo Switch Pro, and I think that all of us are kind of thinking the same thing, but it all comes down to how Nintendo is going to classify it. And we can go two routes with this. Is Nintendo going to go in a DS to 3DS route where, hey, look, this is a clear upgrade to what we've done with the DS. It is a next generation system. It's backwards compatible with what you got there with the DS. You can do everything on the DS with the 3DS, but we have some extra bells and whistles. We got some extra processing power. We've got some new games, and it's a completely separate system that gets its own count when it comes to the sales and everything, because Nintendo does not combine the 3DS and also the DS. Or do they go the Game Boy to Game Boy Color route, which Nintendo combines those sales, but Game Boy Color had a number of exclusive games where you can only play it on the Game Boy Color due to the upgraded feature set and the upgraded parts of the Game Boy Color, which there were so many games. There was a number. The most that I think Nintendo has ever done for some type of generation like update to a system, usually Nintendo will put out something like they've done before, like an N64 DD or something like that, and it usually never really takes off. Or it's like the new Nintendo 3DS where there's not a lot of exclusives, there's barely anything. But with the Game Boy Color, there was a lot, but you could also play, you know, the regular Game Boy game. So which route is Nintendo going to go in? The hardware could be exactly the same when it comes to a next generation Switch and also a upgrade to it. It can be exactly the same, but it's going to be based on how Nintendo decides to market it. Game Boy Color style or Nintendo 3DS to the DS style. So I think that's where the disconnect comes from. Now, I personally feel that whatever Nintendo decides to do, it's not going to be a half step for the Nintendo Switch. I think that's the biggest thing. So even if it is a pro system, it's going to feel like a next generation step, or it's going to feel like that next big leap, kind of like how Game Boy Color did, even though back then obviously the graphics weren't way better or anything, but it felt like a huge step up from the Game Boy Pocket to Game Boy Color. So is Nintendo going to go that route with what they're doing here? That's going to be very interesting. I personally feel that Nintendo is probably going to go with the next system in line and just support the previous system, have backwards compatibility with the Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever else you want to call it, and then they're just going to go from there. Keep the same gimmick, keep the same thing, improve the power, add new software gimmicks, add new features, have things built in that came late in the life of the Nintendo Switch, or even expand upon them with better feature set and tools. And obviously the incredible gimmick of having the Nintendo Switch and having a portable unit and then also hook it up to your TV. But I do think that one of the new gimmicks or main things that they're going to go off of, which is why I think it might be more of a new or next generation system that has backwards compatibility, and Nintendo does support the Nintendo Switch with games that are dual launches and things like that. I think that the dock, that kind of tells me that they're maybe doing something with that, because you can update the dock. Obviously they put an Ethernet port in there. It's a bit more advanced. So it does seem like a supplemental computing device could be in the works for Nintendo for a next generation or next Switch. But here's what I'll say with 2022, based off of the games that are coming out at this point and how good and quality those games are and the sales of people buying it, people are content. There are a number of people, gamers out there, that will just buy the games and play them and don't really have too much of a problem because the games are fun. Kirby is fun, 30 frames per second, but it's fun, it's responsive, it's really cool. They're good games, good rated, and they're getting great sales too. So I think that 2022 proves that the Nintendo Switch can still go on at this point despite its advanced age. But at the same time, it also proves that, yeah, it looks like something else could be in the works as well, because really, I've talked about this before, and I probably should have talked about this a little bit earlier, but I've mentioned it, that Nintendo, as soon as they put out one system, the next system is already getting ready to be prepped in terms of them doing R&D, right? So they're looking at it, they're saying, hey, here's what we can do. They're researching technology, and they're getting the next system ready, the next things. Developers, publishers, whatever the case is, they don't wait all the way for 5 or 6 years, you know, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, and say, okay, now we're going to work on our next system. That's just not how tech and R&D works. They do it like right away. And Nintendo has stated this multiple times. Microsoft and Sony also have stated this too. So it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how all of this works out. But what do you guys think about Nintendo Switch's 2022 and what it says about its lifespan and what Nintendo does going forward? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and we will see you for the next video. Peace.